Hello and welcome to the Digital Orphanage. In part 1 of this Dragon 32 series, you saw me back at the Museum of Computing, bringing home a whole nest of dragons to refurbish. That episode finished with all the power supplies refurbished and ready to provide the dragons with their power source. In this episode, I start with the Dragon 32 from the museum display cabinet. This is an accessioned item, formerly recorded in the museum's collection. It's important to make sure such items are in good working order first. And here it is on my dining room table that's standing in as a test bench, connected to this beautiful 21-inch Sony KV-21LS30U from 2001, given to us by Mrs. TDO's work colleague after she heard it was heading to the tip. Just behold for a moment a 4x3 Trinitron CRT with a totally flat screen, stereo speakers and 3 inputs, including RGB SCART. Unfortunately, this dragon will not show off any of that, as it refuses to be woken from a deep slumber. Only the dull clunk of the internal relay switch gives any hint that this dragon is not completely dead. To check whether it's just the picture that's at fault, I try a cartridge game that I know will play sound with only a single key press. Still nothing, so there's something quite fundamental at fault. Time to get this dragon to the operating table and open it up. The Dragon 32 has a simple but very sturdy design. You can just tell Dragon Data was eyeing the same schools market as Acorn. The case was even advertised as being strong enough to bear a TV set or monitor. Just 4 crosshead screws, under the remains of old warranty seals, is all that's keeping me out of this case. The tag attached to one screw details the item number in the museum's records. Once removed, the top case simply lifts away with no catches or wires, a truly lovely machine to work on. Inside, the Dragon 32 has 3 main parts: the power supply board, the motherboard and the keyboard, connected together by 2 sturdy ribbon cables. The keyboard copied the same layout as the TRS-80 colour computer, and this won't be the last similarity with that competitor. The power supply board has 2 functions. One side has the RF modulator for a TV, along with a separate monitor output with colour composite video and mono sound. The other side houses the PSU connector, a handy power switch, and the DC rectification and voltage regulation circuit. The 9-pin ribbon cable is soldered to the power supply board and plugs into the motherboard with a nice chunky connector. It carries positive and negative 5 volts and positive 12 volts to the motherboard. It also carries composite video and mono audio in the other direction. The layout of the motherboard varied over many different versions. This is a Mark II board, and as the most common variant, the most likely you'll see. The brain of the Dragon is the Motorola 6809E, first introduced in 1978. It is an 8-bit processor running at 0.89 MHz. And the same is used in the TRS-80 colour computer, both being based on the same Motorola reference design. As expected, the Dragon 32 has 32 kilobytes of RAM, and here on the Mark II board it's populated with 16 individual 16 megabit RAM chips. No half-good 64 megabit RAM chips or daughter boards used on this model. To make the Dragon do something when switched on, it has 2 8K ROMs and offers Microsoft Extended Basic. The Motorola 6847 video display generator sits close to the link cable and generates the Dragon's graphics. With the low resolutions and garish colours, it didn't compare well with its competitors. The SN74LS783 Synchronous Address Multiplexer, or SAM, provides the glue logic to bring together the 6809, RAM and the 6847 into a functioning computer. It also handles clock timings via a 14.218 MHz crystal. On the left hand side of the Dragon are the interface ports, along with a reset button. Left and right analog joystick inputs flank the cassette socket, and a parallel printer port was added to differentiate the Dragon from the TRS-80 colour computer. Finally, we have a program cartridge port, used for both game cartridges and other expansions like a disc controller. So let's breathe some power into this Dragon and see what's causing it not to wake. The first thing of note is the wobbly power connector. The strain relief bolts have loosened over the years. Could this be the cause? A check of the power output shows all the correct voltages are present, so although something I need to remedy, it doesn't appear to be the main fault. As quite a few of the ICs are socketed, it's possible that some connections have oxidized. A poor connection on one of these ICs could cause any number of issues. To rule this out, it's a straightforward process to remove each socketed IC. Some electrical contact cleaner and a fine brush should ensure a good socket contact. Followed by some IPA and individual spar treatment for the legs of each IC, turning grubby chips into a feast fit for a Dragon. Dinner is served. And does it work? Well, no. Still the same black screen. At this point, some people would replace all the capacitors, or maybe convince you that you need to buy an expensive oscilloscope to fault find. But I'm going to show you that you can do a lot on a budget with the right basic tools. A simple and inexpensive logic probe purchased for less than £30, or in my case £1 at a car boot, is a great tool for your retro computer repair bench. Connected to the Dragon's ground and positive 5V lines, it not only shows high and low signals on the ICs, but also if there is activity in the form of pulses. The 6809 is receiving power, but there appears to be no activity on any pins. The reset button does pull the CPU low, so at least that's working. Compare that with a known working Dragon 32. Even sat at just the basic prompt, activity is present which the logic probe indicates with the flashing yellow LED. For our faulty Dragon, it's as if the ignition's on, but the engine's not running. The 14.218 MHz timing crystal is the beating heart of the system, so my attention turns to it. They are fragile items and sensitive to shocks. They can also change their property over time, so just maybe there's a problem with it. Using a multimeter in diode or continuity mode, I should see either no connection or possibly a very high reading, as we're not testing out of the circuit. This one reads quite low, and the same in both directions. Let's compare that to the known working Dragon. No reading in one direction and a high reading in the other. Time for some soldering then. A little tip, something like blue tack is ideal to temporarily hold a component in place to make it easier to solder. A quick check and it now measures the same as the working dragon. Ever wondered what's inside a crystal oscillator? Well, curiosity got the better of me, so let's take a break and have a look. This must be the piezoelectric material I read about on Wikipedia. There's nothing else in the can. The disc is a rigid material and very fragile. This is why you should not subject them to shocks. If you need a replacement for the Dragon's non-standard 14.218 MHz crystal, I recommend Mutant Caterpillar Games, who commissioned new replacements. They also state it helps improve the picture on earlier Dragons that came with a standard 14.318 MHz crystal, so I'll keep that in mind when it's time to check the other Dragons. For this video, I borrowed the crystal from a known working Dragon and purchased one as a replacement. The price was excellent and the delivery quick, and it arrived in a funky holographic looking bubble wrap envelope. This Dragon now has a beating heart. Is it working correctly though? Time to transfer the patient to the test bench. Success! A very slight tweak to C7 results in an excellent picture for a composite video connection. And the cartridge I used earlier, that works too. So we're good to finish the refurbishment. This motherboard has some interesting rework. One of the RAM ICs has been swapped for a different make in the past. This could have been a factory repair during quality control, or possibly a later repair. Other than this and the crystal, the board looks in good condition and is very clean. I'm not recapping this board, as sadly it will spend its life in a glass cabinet. However, these capacitors are from a time before the capacitor plague of the early 90s, so don't automatically need to be replaced. The power board has the loose power connector though. The solder connections look sound, so just a couple of bolts to tighten up. This is an issue 4 board for those who are interested. It's quite dusty though, so I'll give it a brush up. To be expected of any well-loved computer, the keyboard's pretty grubby. It looks possible to unscrew it and remove the back. Unfortunately, all the switches seem to need to be unsoldered too. They possibly assembled the keyboard and then soldered the connections by hand, as it doesn't have the flow soldered look of the motherboard. To remove each keycap, they simply pull vertically off. Only the spacebar has an additional support wire. Then it's a case of using a thin brush to get in between the switches and remove the dust. To remove the support wire without unsoldering the switch looks like it will either bend or break something, so I'll leave the spacebar attached and clean it in situ. Dragon Data's boast about the keyboard being guaranteed for 20 million depressions looks to be backed up by some sound engineering. A sturdy spring returns each key press, and 4 fingers make the electrical contact, so there's a good chance a connection will be made. And after all these years, the plastic still feels sturdy. I want to take this Dragon back to the museum tomorrow. Washing the keycaps would mean waiting for them to dry, so instead I will use this specialist plastic cleaner. They've come up really nice and ready to go straight back onto the keyboard. And who doesn't like some hyperspeed keyboard assembly? Don't you just love the clattery sound of these old keyboards? Looking shiny and not a single washing up bowl or marigold in sight. The case, after a noisy vacuum session, is given the same treatment. This must be a later Dragon 32 case. It has provision for the Dragon 64 board, which had a serial port next to the right joystick port. This could be purchased as an upgrade. The blank space is covered by a small piece of plastic screwed in place on the inside. It's not from the same moulds though, as it's missing the SIO labelling. With a few spare boards, I could imagine it could have been really easy to keep a classroom full of these working. Swapping out the faulty board and repairing it well away from trouble-making kids. You might see I've forgotten to replace the keyboard screws. Don't worry, I noticed after I'd finished filming. It was more than just a single screw being left over this time. The last task is to clean the top case. It's quite dirty, so I'm using deionized water with about 5% IPA. I wouldn't want to wash this case because of the labels. With it being textured plastic, I use my go-to method of cleaning, using the liquid and a soft brush to lift the dirt out of the texture before wiping it away. I perfected this technique when selling X-Display Packard Bell computers in Dixons in the early 90s. It made them look good for the customer, and it would have been great to have had this plastic cleaner back then. It's worth keeping the bench clean. No point making a newly clean computer dirty again. The Dragon label has a few wrinkles, and this is something most Dragons seem to suffer with. The label looks too big for the recess, so I don't know what went wrong there. However, it looks like it will cause damage if I try to adjust it, and I want to keep this machine as original as possible. After all that hard work, I think I deserve a play on this one, before it's imprisoned behind glass. With all the fuss about Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, let's see what the serious Dragon Flight Sim fan was playing. Worlds of Flight from Microdeal was released in 1984 and promises a view-orientated flight simulation, written entirely in machine code. Load M and return is all I need to start the game loading from cassette. I'll speed up the loading for you, but thankfully it comes with a chunky manual to keep me amused for the 3 minutes and 42 seconds it takes to load. And at 35 pages the manual contains everything you need to know to select weather, set controls, read the instruments, and even how to avoid a stall. It also gives you maps of the 9 selectable worlds. With taxi and refueling instructions, this is promising to be something good. The game also makes use of both analog joysticks. So was this the perfect computer for flight sim fans? With a fail-safe press of both joystick buttons to start the engine, it was time to find out. That is, however, after I find out which key releases the brakes. Would you believe it? The brake key. All the information in the manual, it leaves out one important specification: the frame rate. At almost 1 frame a second, this game is like pulling teeth. I loved playing Tomahawk on the CPC, and that managed a far faster frame rate, and in colour. With the supposedly superior 6809 processor, I'm not sure if it's the slower clock speed, poor graphics hardware, or bad programming that makes this game so painfully slow. Even crashing isn't the fun it normally is. Interestingly, the reset button just takes you back to the game's title screen. No escaping here. You need to cycle the power switch to load something else. So if it's bad at 3D games, maybe it's better at platform games. Fearless Freddy by Pocket Money Software caught my eye in the stack of games. This is another brand of Microdeal, who operated from St Austell. Microdeal supported the Dragon and the TRS-80 colour computer until January 1st, 1988. Who knew a Welsh computer would get so much support from Cornwall? $1.99 was a month's pocket money for me in 1984, and Mastertronic provided a lot of fun games for that price. But how much fun would that have bought me on a Dragon? This game loaded in a slightly quicker 3.5 minutes, but with only a small cassette inlay, there's nothing to read to keep you amused. Maybe I should have brought in my transformer to play with. Instead, most of the instructions are given on screen once the game is loaded. The aim of the game is to run around the building and rescue the occupants' possessions from the burning building, while avoiding the moving fireballs. But is this something a real firefighter would do? Well, if my house caught fire, I'd sure hope they'd at least rescue all my Amigas. The game's graphics are colourful and at least fast moving. It's not up to Magic Knight 199 quality, but fairly fun. Basic sound seems to be a pattern with the Dragon games though. Pressing the reset button on this game brings up a copy protection notice about preventing piracy. The last game I'm going to play is a cartridge game. Dragon cartridges come in these pretty boxes that would look great in a collection, and they were made by Dragon Data themselves in Wales. They're chunky and feel sturdy, which is just as well as they need a good hard push before they clunk home. But the reward is near instant gameplay, something that was sadly missing from my CPC, even with a disk drive. In Railrunner, you move a character called Bill Switchman down through a maze of moving trains and handcars to rescue the hobos on the other side. If you're thinking this is a flipped Frogger clone, you'd probably be right. Again, the sound is basic but functional, and the graphics chunky and gaudy, with everything moving a character width at a time. As it's now late in the evening, I'm rubbish at it. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. Time for sleep. but tomorrow it goes back to the museum. I need to show Mrs. TDO I'm making progress, but I need to speed up the refurb process for the next video. At first I put it back where I found it, but it looked so cramped there. I think it much prefers its new home. So until next time, goodbye.